I'm calling the meeting to order. Meeting is called to order, please. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082, the Heritage Committee, at its 71st meeting, will study the issue of systemic racism and religious discrimination. Our first witness is Iqra Khalid, who moved motion 103 that went to the House and was passed, and the committee agreed to study this motion. And so, without any further ado, I will ask Ms. Khalid to begin, but I will let her know that she has 10 minutes to speak, and then obviously there would be questions and answers.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Honorable members, thank you for inviting me to your committee today, commencing the start of your study on systemic racism and religious discrimination. I am a member of Parliament in one of the most diverse ridings in Canada. I like to say that the whole world is represented in my city of Mississauga. We live beside each other as Canadians. We all, in our different ways, contribute to the building of Canada. We all form part of this beautiful Canadian fabric. When it comes to the ground reality, I often find myself wondering, how is it that we can come from so many different places, be of every color, practice different faiths, and yet collectively be one of the most peaceful countries in the world? Balancing the interests of such a diverse and dynamic group of people like Canadians requires a lot of work. It requires partnerships between our policymakers, our civil society that act as watchdogs, our grassroots organizations that provide the programs and services required, and our individual Canadians and the respect that they have for one another. Madam Chair, racism and religious discrimination have no place in Canadian society. We value the differences amongst Canadians, and we know that diversity is our strength. A recent survey commissioned for the Globe and Mail and conducted by Nanos Research in 2016 suggests that 7 in 10 respondents said that there is still a lot of racism in Canada. 1 in 5 have had racist remarks directed at them, and more than a third have said that they have made a racist remark in the company of others. In 2016 alone, there were cases of discrimination and racism amongst almost every community in Canada. On September 20th, 2016, the University of Alberta woke up to posters put around campus depicting turbaned men of the Sikh faith with racist insults written above them. In December 2016 in Edmonton, a man went up to 2 women wearing hijabs. He then proceeded to pull out a rope from his pocket, tie the rope into a noose, and said, "This is for you." On August 18th, 2016, Andre Bear, a student from Little Pine First Nation, Saskatchewan, said, and I quote, "I remember having white friends when I was growing up, but their parents didn't like me, or they would tell me to go home. People weren't allowed to play with me because I was Native." On November of the same year, swastikas and racist slurs were spray painted on a church with a black pastor in Ottawa. "Go home" was spray painted on the Ottawa Muslim Association front doors, and anti-Semitic slurs were spray painted on synagogues. On January 29, 2017, 6 Canadians were gunned down in their place of worship. Statistics Canada's most recent hate crime data shows that the number of police-reported hate crimes against Muslims increased by 60% in 2015 compared to the previous year. Many Muslim Canadians have told me personally that they do not feel safe practicing their faith here in Canada. Statistics Canada data also shows the number of incidents targeting Jewish Canadians, remains the highest amongst religions targeted at 178 incidents in 2015 alone. In addition, reported hate crimes targeting Black Canadians still made up the largest percentage of the total number of incidents at 224 incidents in 2015. Madam Chair, systemic racism and religious discrimination is real. I listen to many stories from people every day. Early last year, an e-petition came to my attention that had over 69,000 Canadians come together to call on our government to combat Islamophobia. I was astonished by the numbers. This must be real, I thought. So I decided to do more research. I was astounded even more, and frankly disappointed to find out that data on this issue was very limited. I struggled to find real numbers. Thus, in light of the limited statistics, the media reports, the concerns raised by Canadians, and the personal stories that I hear, I felt that something needed to be done. As a parliamentarian, I felt the need for more concrete data to reflect on the problem of systemic racism and religious discrimination as a whole in Canada. And I thought, what would be a better place to study the issue than our own House of Commons, the House of the People? On December 1st, 2016, I had the privilege to table Motion 103. The motion builds on the support from that e-petition 411 and uses the example of Islamophobia to make a larger point about the problem of all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination, that we have to find ways to tackle that broader problem in Canada as a whole. Allow me to state on the record that I am not an expert on the subject matter, but rather a believer in our parliamentary process. I trust that this committee will bring the best experts to the table and provide us, Canadians, with a more substantive look at the status of the systemic racism and religious discrimination issue in our Canada. Due to this, my recommendations to your respected committee will be merely regarding the focus and direction of this committee as you move forward with this study. My recommendations are that this committee take a unified approach to study all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination in Canada, that this committee direct experts to testify on best ways to collect data, to contextualize hate crime reports, and conduct needs assessments for impacted communities. More specifically, how can we as parliamentarians and government support this? Thirdly, to direct experts to testify on the best methods to reducing or eliminating systemic racism and religious discrimination in Canada. I would hope that the outcome of your study provides more concrete recommendations to reducing or eliminating systemic racism and religious discrimination in Canada. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm happy to take your questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. Khalid. And now we begin the question and answer piece, and I just wanted to recognize a colleague in the room, the leader of the Green Party, Elizabeth May, who is here as a member of Parliament listening to the testimony. Thank you. Welcome. Now, we begin with the 7-minute round, and the 7-minute includes questions and answers. So I'm going to give you a 2-minute time, sort of when you're ready, you have 2 minutes to go so that you can wrap up, those of you who are asking questions or answering them. And so I begin with the Liberals for 7 minutes. Ms. Dillon.
Thank you for joining us today and your very poignant statement. My first question is, can you describe the reaction you have seen since this motion was presented and what you have experienced personally?
Thank you, Ms. Dillon, for that question. And I think that what had happened, it's something that I believe was necessary. Canadians engaged in a conversation that is much needed. And now we're looking at the way forward. This motion, this study, is an opportunity for parliamentarians to come together, to be unified in seeing how we can tackle this issue of systemic racism and religious discrimination. There's lots to be learned from the statistics, from the media reports, from people's personal experiences, including mine. And we must use those in our unified approach to combating systemic racism and religious discrimination, ensuring that all communities that need the help, the assistance, are getting that. And I'm really looking forward to the concrete recommendations that this committee will provide for this issue going forward.
And can you give us your thoughts a little bit of what's been happening in my home province of Quebec regarding the fire bombings, the mosque shooting? Can you give us a little bit of your opinion on that?
I really think that Canadians are realizing what is the issue, which makes this committee's study that much more important. It gives all of you the opportunity to come together and to look at these issues, to hear from Canadians, to hear from experts on what is happening and how can we continue to build those bridges amongst minorities in Canada, amongst our diverse population here in Canada, and how can we continue to have those partnerships, to strengthen those partnerships between our policymakers, between our civil society, between our grassroots organizations, and Canadians at large. How do we develop that respect that we have for each other? And how do we as a committee go forward in providing those recommendations?
And why do you think it's important to have statistics on hate crime, data collection?
Well, as our Prime Minister and our government always says, good data leads to good policy. When we have that data, when we are able to contextualize it, we are able to better understand what the needs are of impacted communities. We are better able to come up with those concrete recommendations, with those concrete initiatives that our government may take in enhancing and in building those partnerships with our civil society, with our grassroots organizations and Canadians at large. That data piece helps us to understand what is happening at the grassroots level, and it helps us to have effective and better policy.
And as parliamentarians, we have many people walking into our offices with various problems. How many have walked in with concerns or been, we could say, victims of racial profiling? Have you seen that?
There's been a lot of people that have walked into not only my offices, but I'm sure many of those of the members that sit around this table as well. Give you an example. I had a conversation with the local rabbi of my riding, Rabbi Polak, and we had a very at-length conversation about the discrimination that the Jewish community faces in Canada and specifically in my riding. And she talked about those trials and tribulations and how unified a community can really affect how we can help each other. And by having these kind of stories really define how we take this study going forward, I think that we can do better by Canadians. We can really work to enhance and really use our diversity as a strength, because quite honestly, it's our future. Our kids of tomorrow are going to need the support that we can provide today.
Your motion, it covers all sorts of discrimination against all communities that coexist in Canada. Why do you think this is a very important motion? Why would you want us? What would you want us to study here?
Well, I'm not at liberty to restrict the committee. I think that the objective of the motion has been completed, and that now a study is taking place, that we as parliamentarians, this committee, this Heritage Committee, is taking ownership of an issue that we are seeing in statistics, we are seeing in media reports, we are hearing from Canadians. So the objective of the motion is now complete, and I'm really looking forward to how the committee, bringing on its experts and understanding from the experts, how can we find better ways to collect data? How can we find better ways to contextualize data? How can we as policymakers, how can we as representatives of the people assist in really helping to build those bridges amongst different communities here in Canada?
I want to thank you so much for having the courage to present this motion, for coming here before us, and to try to help all communities in Canada.
Thank you so much, Ms. Dillon.
Thank you, Ms. Dillon. And I go to the Conservatives. Scott Reid.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And to Ikra, thank you very much for being here. I wanted to go up and shake your hand beforehand and ask if you'd enjoyed your summer and all those collegial things, but unfortunately I didn't get the chance. I'll do it at the end. You're looking well rested anyway, for what it's worth. I wanted to ask this as a starting point. A few years back, I was co-chair, along with a Liberal MP, Mario Silva, of an informal parliamentary group called the Canadian Parliamentary Coalition to Combat Anti-Semitism. We had members from all parties serving on it. Are you familiar with that group?
No, I'm not.
Okay. I think what I might try and do then is to get a copy of the report we made. At the time, the study looked into obviously anti-Semitism, as the name implies, how to deal with anti-Semitism. And one of the bases on which we're looking at it was the assumption that anti-Semitism has historically been a kind of canary in the coal mine for religious, or in some cases racial discrimination, because as you know, the very worst anti-Semites of all conceived of Judaism not as a religion but as a race. At any rate, looking at this as the canary in the coal mine for other forms of discrimination, hatred, and hate-motivated violence. And we had a few recommendations that I think might prove useful in the context of the report that your motion could lead to from this committee. This included, and I wanted to ask you what you think about these as potential ideas, given that you've thought a lot about this general subject matter over the past few months. We felt there was room for improvement in better unified police reporting on statistics of violence and other hate-motivated acts. We felt we were dealing, of course, with synagogues, because this was Jews, but better federal funding for security around synagogues. Obviously, I'm expressing a prejudice here, I guess. I think there's a very strong case for this in the context of mosques as well, given the fact that we saw those terrible, terrible events, those murders in Quebec City at a mosque. Do you think there would be profit in us pursuing this kind of security-related research as part of our agenda in response to your motion?
That's a fantastic, I'm so glad that you've put in so much thought into what these recommendations would look like. As I stated earlier, I am not an expert on the subject matter, and I defer to the direct experts that will come before this committee to inform committee members on what would be the best way forward, what these concrete recommendations could be. And I'm very glad that you have worked very hard on this issue over your past number of years, and I know that you're quite a learned man yourself. And I really looking forward to a unified approach as to how we can combat systemic racism and religious discrimination, all forms of it, here in Canada.
Thank you. As you will recall, back in February, motion M103 was debated, and then the day after the first hour of debate, a second motion, very similar, but introduced by my colleague from Cypress Hills Grasslands, who is sitting beside me today, was also debated. Very similar in wording, but it contained a few passages. It did not use the word Islamophobia, but it did contain a few passages that were absent from the motion from M103, specifically included the following words, that the House, A, recognize that Canadian society is not immune to the climate of hate and fear exemplified by the recent and senseless violent acts at a Quebec City mosque. And then further down it said, it called on us to condemn all forms of systemic racism, religious intolerance, and discrimination against Muslims, Jews, Christians, Sikhs, Hindus, and other religious communities, end quote. When you were asked about this, you said, well, I agree with most of this after all, I wrote 98% of it. So this is the 2% you didn't write. I'm going to guess that you also agree with this part. Would I be correct?
I'm not understanding your question.
Well, this is the part of the motion that was introduced the day after M103 that was debated in the House of Commons. Much of that wording was lifted directly from M103. This is the part that was not lifted from M103. It was added in. We felt it was important. And I'm just trying to establish, I have a suspicion that you actually agree with this part as well that I just read, that we should try and fight against discrimination against Muslims, Jews, Christians, Sikhs, Hindus, and all religious communities, and also that we should single out senseless acts of violence as the paradigmatic thing against which we are fighting.
Would
Are you
like
comfortable
to continue
being in agreement
your...
with those things?
Of course. I mean, I am here before this committee on invitation to commence a study on systemic racism and religious discrimination, all forms of it.
Okay.
And I'm really looking forward to how this committee tackles this issue, to really looking for that testimony of experts from all across the board to seeing how we can better define how the relationships that we have between each other as Canadians, how we can work together. You know, and I will give an example. I've had many conversations with a lot of people in my riding. And one day I was sitting with Erin Mills United Church, and some of the members that are in that church, they expressed they're first-generation immigrants from Portugal, and they spoke about the issues that they faced. And we talked at length about what kind of issues as communities face, not only when they are newcomers here in Canada, but also as minorities that are impacted, that need that extra help, that are vulnerable. And we came to a conclusion as we spoke, and the conclusion was, you know, if you remove the type or the identity of the person, may it be by their race, by their creed, by the religion they practice, and look at the body of the type of discrimination, it seems that all minorities have gone through it at some point. And it's so important for us as parliamentarians, it's so important for this committee to take on this task in a time when Canada really needs to work hard to build those bridges, to work together between us as policymakers, between our grassroots organizations, our civil society, and Canadians at large. So, you know, the experts that will come before this committee will, I'm sure, inform this committee on all types of systemic racism, religious discrimination, and I'm sure that that the recommendations that will be provided will be fantabulous and really working towards a better and stronger Canada.
Thank you very much. The time is up now, Scott. And now I go to Ms. Kwan, Jenny Kwan of the NDP.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you very much, Ms. Khalid, for first bringing this motion before us. You know, the issue, of course, before us is a very serious one. This particularly in a climate of hate, I would call, especially looking at south of the border, where so much effort is being made to normalize hate and discrimination. It is, for me, extremely disheartening. A person of color, a woman, and having lived through some experiences in my past and continue to, from time to time, experience discrimination as well. And to see how far we have come and the setback that we're now experiencing, it literally just, some days it makes me want to weep to think, you know, the situation that we face today. So with that being said, I think the work before our committee is very important, and I think there's much to be done. I think that in terms of, I guess, first off, addressing the issue of how, as we see in our community, some are working so hard to normalize hate and discrimination. And I'm sure you have experienced that as well. And I wonder if you have any suggestions on how the government can tackle that. None of us are experts per se, but that said, those with lived experiences are perhaps some of the best experts, I might add. So I would love to hear your point of view with respect to what action do you think the government should take from a lived experience point of view on how to deal with this issue.
Thank you very much, Ms. Kwan, for that question and for recognizing the seriousness of this issue that we are talking about today. You know, when it comes to understanding what issues Canadians face, what better way to understand those issues than to actually go to Canadians themselves and to talk about these issues, to have those conversations with them, to try to understand what that impact is of systemic racism and religious discrimination may have on them. I remember reading an article in the Globe and Mail that suggested that young male Chinese Canadians have a harder time getting employment as opposed to their non-Chinese counterparts. And that is, it was suggested in that article that it is because of that name. Because of the name of the person that this type of discrimination occurs. So it's these kind of incidents, when we have the data, when we are able to collect the data, I think that we will be better able to understand the totality of what systemic racism and religious discrimination looks like in Canada, which is why it was one of my recommendations that we find those good ways to collect that data and to contextualize hate crime reports, because we'll understand what the communities need. And like I said, to really understand, we have to go to Canadians and listen to what they have to say.
Thank you for that. There's no question we need to collect data. I would agree with that. I think that's one aspect of it, but not the only aspect. But just on the question around data, because of course I've come across some data that indicate, for example, people who are racialized immigrants, if you will, who come and you know, their economic the economic impact for them is quite significant. In fact, even as of today, for my understanding, that immigrants make less of their counterparts, male or female, right? And we still have some ways to go to equalize that. So for that, there are some issues around institutionalized discrimination, if you will, or racism that's embedded within our system that's created this outcome. And so would you agree then, as part of the work of this committee in terms of recommendation to government to take action on, is also to address those kinds of institutionalized aspects in impacting a very important component of people of color, and that is their financial opportunities?
And that's a great point that you raised, Ms. Kwan. I myself am a first-generation immigrant, and I watched my parents go through that struggle. And as a member of parliament, I am approached by many newcomers that are also having a difficult time finding employment, for example, or having culture shock and really integrating themselves in Canadian society. I know our federal government has done a lot to help those newcomers and has been. We are a country that values our diversity, and we really show it to be our strength, and there are programs that help those newcomers, but we can always do more. So what you talk about in terms of understanding other ways to collect that data, I really think that there will be great experts that will come before this committee to help advise the committee on how we can collect that data and how we can continue to work towards tackling systemic racism and religious discrimination.
I'm sorry if perhaps I'm not explaining myself, because I'm talking about beyond collecting data. I'm talking about action that needs to be taken, and action that needs to address the socio-economic discrimination that exists for people from the immigrant community, people of color. And so to that end, we have all heard of these stories. people who have credentials, who've come from a different country, and their credentials are not recognized. And we need to break down the systemic barriers with respect to that so that their credentials are recognized and that they can be employed in their field, right, to which they have already spent a lot of time on. So that would be part of, I would hope, the study and the recommendation that is required. Would you agree with that, yes or no?
Well, I think it's up to the committee to decide which direction that the committee should go on.
So, sorry, I'm just going to interrupt. Do you not have an opinion about that? Do you not think this is part of, this is your motion which we're studying. Do you not think that that's an important part of the work that we should be undertaking?
Ms. Kwan, the objective of the motion was to bring forward this study. It is upon this committee as a whole to take that unified approach, to study the issue, to work with each other to find those recommendations that will assist us as policymakers to work together and to build those bridges amongst Canadians.
Well, there's no doubt we will work in a unified approach. I fully hope that and anticipate that, but I was hoping to get an opinion from you.
Thank you. I now go to the Liberals. Darrell Sampson, 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you very much for being here and having brought forward this motion. I think it's extremely important. Systemic racism is evident, and we need to be talking about it, and this is one way. And when you talk about these issues, you bring forward data, and you do needs assessment, and then solutions should come forward so that we can do better, I guess, which is important. But just your quick opinion, I don't want to take too much time because I'd like to leave a question for Madame May here, and maybe my colleague as well here. So I'm going to do it very quickly. But since the passing of the motion, Parliament and the media has been focusing on Islamophobia and combating of anti-Muslim sentiments. But for you, are we? Is the focus much greater than that for you? Can you explain that quickly?
Most definitely, Mr. Sampson. The focus of the motion, the intention of the motion was all along to look at all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination in Canada, to see how we can build bridges amongst communities, how we can build on those partnerships between our policymakers, our civil society, grassroots organizations, and Canadians at large, how we can strengthen those ties. Islamophobia was used as an example, but it is not the content of the whole motion. The motion was really now the study. I hope this committee will take charge to be inclusive, to include all forms of systemic racism, religious discrimination, to hear from all communities that are impacted.
And I'm extremely happy to hear you say that, because we need to be focusing on all those issues. But I represent a large number of Black, African, Nova Scotian who have had a very tough time for a very, very, very long time. And systemic discrimination has been and is still evident today. So how important do you feel it is to combat anti-Black, if you want, racism and the rise of white supremacy?
It is very important, sir. And as I said earlier, it's really about working with those communities that are impacted. I believe I had quoted over 200 incidents across Canada reported by Statistics Canada that have Black Canadians as targets for hate crimes. And I think that this is something that that you as a committee should really take upon yourselves. And I hope that this community specifically will also be included in the study as a whole.
This is very important. I thank you once again for that. Ms. May, maybe you would want to have a question.
Darren, you've so kindly decided to share your time with Ms. May and Mr. Virani. Ms. May, I don't know how much you can share because you only have 4 minutes left. But
I'd be very brief, and I'd love to share the time with my friend, Mr. Virani. Very generous of you, Darrell. Thank you, and thank you, Madam Chair. Very briefly, I have never seen such fomented anger, concern, and misconceptions about any motion before Parliament as applied to Motion 103. So I just wanted to put to you some of the things, and I have very wonderful constituents, good-hearted, nice people who sent me emails asking whether these things were true and how could I vote for Motion 103. So since I voted for it, I'd just like to put to you as the author whether you agree with me that none of these things could possibly happen due to Motion 103. So I put to you that I have told my constituents there is no way Motion 103 is going to limit free speech. There is no way Motion 103 is going to bring in Sharia law to Canada. And there is no way Motion 103 is going to place Islam as a more protected status than other religions. So if you want to comment on it, but I just appreciate your view on whether there's any way Motion 103 could be used in these fashions.
Thank you very much, Ms. May, for that question. And you're very right. There's a lot of misconceptions, but we have to look forward. We have to look at what this study will do, which is to give people that ability to speak out where they may not have been able to speak out before. There is no legislation from my end that is going to come out of this. It is really up to the committee to decide which way to go. My only recommendations to the committee, as I outlined before, is to work together, collect that data, find ways to collect that data, and tackle this issue as a whole.
And with my final brief comment, I just want to associate myself with everything my friend Jenny Kwan said. We're living in a time where, to my horror, white supremacy is being normalized as something for which it is something that people will identify with, such as the young naval officers who showed up at the Mi'kmaq protest in Halifax. These are things that I hope this committee can find ways to recommend action, because we are a society that has traditionally, and I think at least in our recent history, not always, we've got episodes of anti-Semitism and anti-Asian laws and regulations and rules that go way back. But we do need to actually take a firm stand and have action that will eliminate, and to the greatest extent possible, racism and religious discrimination in this country. So I thank you for bringing your motion forward, and thank you for the time.
Thank you. I think we have 1 minute and 30 seconds for Arif.
Thank you, Ms. Khalid, for your courage in bringing this motion forward and for testifying here today. Building on Ms. May's question, I've had a lot of people come to me and ask me, are you chilling my ability to raise a legitimate question about a faith? And I've said to them, no, in terms of, one can openly question whether we should have female priests, as questioning the Catholic faith, for example. One should be able to legitimately debate aspects of what are the dietary restrictions on Muslims, for example. But Islamophobia, to me, means not uttering death threats, assaulting, hatred, and threats of violence towards people and vandalism of their places of worship. I just want you to comment on that and how you've responded to that kind of criticism in terms of how you see Islamophobia, because to me, it's never been a complicated term.
20 seconds in which to make that comment.
I look forward to how this committee tackles that issue.
Thank you. And now we go to the second round. But given that Ms. Khalid has until 5 o'clock, we only have 7 minutes. This is supposed to be a 5-minute round. So as a chair, I'm going to make it a 3-minute round, and I'm going to have Mr. Sweet from the Conservatives next, and Mr. Van Dal from the Liberals. 3 minutes, please.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Yes.
Just like to raise the point that we didn't start until almost 4:15, so I'm just wondering if we can extend this session so that we get the full hour with this witness. Thank you.
15 minutes on. Okay, fine. We'll go ahead. We start with Mr. Sweet, Conservatives. 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I appreciate the opportunity to be in this committee and participate in this study. I also want to commend Ms. Khalid. Just so happens that my colleagues here beside me, we all serve on the Subcommittee for International Human Rights. Mr. Reid doesn't anymore. He chaired that subcommittee for the better part of a decade, and so she joins us and people who are dedicated to human rights, freedom, the rule of law, certainly fight against racism, and so I want to begin my questions by saying that I'm glad that we've had the ability to work together for the last couple of years. And I believe, no matter how you may perceive my question, that all of your intentions have been good and for the betterment of all people. But listen, at the expense of being the one who identifies the elephant in the room, I don't think it would be an overreach to say that everybody in this room agrees with the anti-racism aspect of M103. in the aspect of the defense of religious freedom aspects of M103. The concern that I highlighted in my speech, and I believe Mr. Anderson did as well in the chamber, was the concern that we had in regards to the etymology, the term itself of Islamophobia. And I just wanted to know if you were concerned at all about this term, the fact that it's been around for a very short period of time, hasn't really stood the test of any kind of academic rigor. If you are concerned that individuals, and you've already heard from other colleagues, so it's not something new, that there's a large percentage of people in Canada that are concerned that they would be, their speech would be stifled if something like Islamophobia wasn't really defined. So I'm wondering if you have any of those concerns in that regard, and I'm wondering what your definition of Islamophobia is.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sweet, and I also say that it's been a pleasure to serve on the International Human Rights Subcommittee with you, really tackling issues from across the world on issues of equality and ensuring that people's rights are maintained and respected. When I put forward Islamophobia specifically, the definition that I prescribe to is an irrational fear or hatred of Muslims or Islam that leads to discrimination. But we are sitting here at a stage where the committee is now commencing this study on all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination. And I'm really looking forward to having this committee engage experts on how we can help impacted communities, how we can really work with impacted communities, not just of the Muslim faith, but also of the Jewish faith, also of the Indigenous communities, also of Black Canadians, of Chinese Canadians, of all minorities, impacted minorities here in Canada, how we can work together with them as policymakers to encourage and to build those bridges and to tackle the difficult issue of systemic racism and religious discrimination here in Canada. I think it's really about building those bridges. You know, Canada is a very diverse country, and as I said in my statement, you know, I feel that the whole world is represented in my city of Mississauga. I believe last I checked, there are about 43 different languages that are spoken in that city, which really goes to show how diverse we are as Canadians. So when we are looking at a study that tackles or tries to tackle systemic racism and religious discrimination here in Canada, we really are looking to hear from those that are impacted. And I think that the committee has reached out to a lot of different impacted communities, and I'm looking forward to following the progress of this committee and the recommendations that come out of your hard work here.
So right now you wouldn't want to direct the committee, but you would encourage the committee, rather than focus on the Islamophobia aspect of it, is to the broader aspect of racism in regards to every single community, whether it be race or religion, etc., and make sure that the study was broad in that regard.
That is the text of the motion. If I believe it directs or asks the Heritage Committee to study the issue of all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination, including Islamophobia. And
just wanted to remind you the discussion that we had, that was exactly the amendment that we wanted on the original motion, to make sure it only included all racism without focusing on the one.
Sweet. And now Mr. Van Daal for the Liberals, 5 minutes.
Sorry. Thank you, Ikra. First of all, I want to compliment you on your courage in bringing this forward and your leadership for penning your motion and having this important discussion. Are you aware that the Canadian Race Relations Foundation defines Islamophobia as expressions of fear and negative stereotypes, bias, or acts of hostility towards the religion of Islam or individual Muslims? In addition, the Ontario Human Rights Commission defines Islamophobia as can be described as stereotypes, bias, or acts of hostility towards individual Muslims or followers of Islam in general.
Yes, sir.
I'm sure you're aware of that. In addition, when I read your motion, and I'm going to continue the theme that was started by Ms. May on, when I read your motion, number A, recognize the need to quell the increasing climate of public hate and fear. B, condemn Islamophobia and all forms of systemic racism and religious discrimination. Number I, develop a whole-of-government approach to reducing or eliminating systemic racism and religious discrimination, including Islamophobia. I know you've been threatened. People have called your office. They sent you emails. They have not been very kind to you. People have called my office and complained that they don't want Sharia law. They don't want their freedom of speech curtailed. My question is, based on your lived experience, do you have any idea why this whole motion, well developed, just spun out of control into a bunch of basically lies, things that it was not? Do you have an opinion on that?
Thank you very much, Mr. Vandel, for that question. And I think that the conversation that Canadians had over the past number of months was a very important conversation. I think it is a great way to lead up to this study. I'm very humbled and honored that this study has commenced and that we are sitting here today ready to tackle this issue, to face all of the challenges that we do as Canadians, as a diverse group of people. Experiences not only of mine, but of many Canadians like me who may belong to a community or a minority or identify themselves as such. I think that this study will give them that opportunity to speak, to raise their voice where their voice may not have been heard before. So I think that this study will enhance that freedom of speech, will really help to bring to light those voices, will really give a microphone to those voices that haven't been heard before. I think that the opportunity and the challenge really lies with this committee to engage Canadians, all of Canadians, in this conversation and continue that conversation and to come up with recommendations as to how we can take those conversations and transform them into solid recommendations that we can use to better build those bridges amongst Canadians.
Do you feel that certain segments of the news media played a role in whipping up people's anxieties and fears and hate so that they would call this committee and express their outrage on information that was completely false? Do you feel certain segments of the media had a role to play there?
I'm sure that it did. However, I think that we can use the attention of Canadians, their ability or their interest to engage in this conversation as a positive in this committee, to really use their experiences to enhance their opinions of all types of minorities, of all Canadians, and use that to inform us, to inform you in your recommendations in this committee.
Thank you. Thanks, Dan. Mr. Anderson for the Conservatives.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to Ms. Khalid for being here today. You talked a little bit earlier about visiting with some of the faith communities and talked about how they can't remove their creed, they can't remove their distinctives or whatever. The faith communities, by definition, basically hold values that are different than the society around them, and they believe that they should be able to maintain those distinctive tenets and without any interference. And I'm just wondering, as you've thought through this and gone through the debate on this issue, do you think that we need to consider provisions in order to accomplish that, to be able to protect the faith communities in Canada so that they can then live out their distinctions without interference?
Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson, for that question. And I will begin my answer by saying that it is an honor to serve with you on our International Human Rights Subcommittee. And you have always raised the issue of equality for everybody, regardless of which faith they practice. So I thank you for your leadership with religious freedoms and all of the work that you've done with that. I want to say it, the beauty of Canada is our Charter of Rights and Freedoms, that we are a secular nation that protects the right of somebody to practice whichever religion it is that they wish to practice, that they should not be discriminated against based on what they look like, what their shell looks like, or what orientation they are, what gender they belong to. Our Charter of Rights and Freedoms does that. So when we as a committee now, well, I keep wanting to include myself in this, but when you as a committee study this, you're going to look at all of these issues. How do we enhance those rights that are already enshrined in our Charter of Rights and Freedoms? How do we ensure that Canadians are free, that their charter rights are protected? How do we ensure as a committee that we are continuing to build bridges amongst Canadians? How we're helping those impacted communities get the help that they need? How are we collecting data? How are we working together to tackle the issue of systemic racism and religious discrimination?
Okay, and I think that both of us would have liked to find ourselves on the same side of the vote in the House
and
on this issue,
sir.
which is, I mean, we did try to make an amendment that we hoped would have been acceptable to the government. It wasn't, but I've appreciated working with you. But on the other side of the equation, so you're talking about faith communities realizing and seeing out the rights that they have, then there's another side of that equation, which is that people want to have the right to critique those very communities. And do we need to do anything in order to improve people's capacity in Canada to be able to critique honestly and fairly, those communities that are different than the one that they live in?
Thank you very much, Mr. Anderson. I think that is a question that is a very important one, is where do we draw the line between one person's rights and another's? And I think that Canada, being the secular, strong nation that it is, we protect everybody's freedom of freedom to speak. We protect everybody's freedom to practice their whichever faith that they belong to. And it is the onus is on this committee when they study systemic racism and religious discrimination in the coming weeks and months, is how do we ensure that all rights are protected? How do we ensure that we are continuing to build those bridges and increasing those partnerships between different communities with the diverse interests and complementing or contrasting interests? How do we as policymakers come together to better build those partnerships and build those bridges amongst Canadians? And I'm really looking forward to the recommendations that come out of this report.
Do you have any suggestions on legislative changes that we might take a look at that you would feel are important or necessary? Have you thought of anything? You have anything that you would suggest? You're the witness here, and it's good that we're going to do our work, but do you have any suggestion? You mentioned Charter of Rights and Freedoms and realizing those rights that we each have, but do you have any suggestions for the committee about legislative direction that we might suggest?
Thank you, Mr. Anderson. And I think that the whole goal of the motion was for this study to take place, and I'm very happy to have been invited here to come and commence this study. So really looking forward to what experts and what Canadians really have to say on this matter, and how it will form a part of that of the report and the recommendations.
I think we should move on because we will shortchange the next group. And so I want to thank Ms. Khalid for coming. And thank you for answering the questions so generously. And thank everyone for participating. And so we will break for about a minute while the other groups come in. Thank you. Call the meeting to order. Pursuant to Standing Order 108, 2, this is a study of systemic racism and religious discrimination by the Heritage Committee. We have 4 groups of witnesses. The Department of Canadian Heritage, represented by Jennifer Aiken and Jerome Morrison. The Royal Canadian Mounted Police, represented by Gilles Michaud. Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, representative by Ritu Banerjee, and the Treasury Board Secretariat, represented by Carl Trotter and Margaret Van Amelsworth. Now, the usual, as you know, the usual protocol is you have each of you will act as a group, so there'll be 4 groups. You have 10 minutes to present, and maybe if you could do less than 10 minutes, great, but you have 10 minutes to present, and then we will go through a round of questions from the group. So I shall begin with the Department of Canadian Heritage, Ms. Aiken and Monsieur Morrison. Will you be doing the presentation, Ms. Aiken?
Yes, I will.
Okay, so we begin.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Merci et merci aux membres.
Thank you, and thank you for members of the committee for inviting me to appear before you today to support your efforts. My name is Jennifer Aiken, and I am the Assistant Deputy Minister of Strategic Policy, Planning, and Corporate Affairs at the Department of Canadian Heritage. The main focus of my remarks today will be providing the committee with an overview of the various tools and initiatives that the Department of Canadian Heritage employs to counter various forms of racism and discrimination.
The extent of diversity of our country. According to Statistics Canada's population projections, by 2036, Canada could see between 34.7% and 39.9% of individuals among the working age population belonging to a visible minority group, compared with 19.6% in 2011. Additionally, the number of people affiliated with non-Christian religions could almost double to between 13% and 16% of the population, compared with 9% in 2011. As demonstrated, and as the previous speaker mentioned, by recent police-reported hate crime statistics, there was a 5% increase in reported incidents from 2014 to 2015. While hate crimes targeting Black and Jewish populations remain the most common types of hate crimes related to race or ethnicity and religion, hate crimes against those of the Muslim faith increased by 61%, from 99 in 2014 to 159 in 2015. While there are challenges, there is room for optimism. For instance, 87% of Canadians 15 years of age and older report that they are proud to be Canadian, and visible minorities express very high levels of pride in Canada, and that comes from the General Social Survey of 2013. Furthermore, in a 2011 report, Canada was found to be the top-ranking OECD country on a measure of tolerance with respect to community acceptance of minority groups and migrants, with a score of 84% compared to an OECD average of 61%. Taken together, this information provides the context for the Canadian Heritage programs that promote inclusion and address racism. The mandate of the Department of Canadian Heritage is centred on fostering and promoting Canadian identity and values, cultural development and heritage. Canadian Heritage is proud to have contributed to Canada's 150th anniversary celebrations, a once-in-a-generation opportunity to inspire new and ambitious vision for a vibrant, diverse, and inclusive Canada, and to recognize the rich and unique contributions of a diverse population. In fact, one of the 4 thematic areas of the commemorations is diversity and inclusion. The Government of Canada is supporting hundreds of initiatives across the country that highlight this important theme. For example, celebrating the presence of people of African ancestry in Saskatchewan, a digital storytelling project by the Afghan Women's Counseling and Integration Community Support Organization that conveys the journeys and settlement experiences of refugees from different parts of the world, and a festival called We Are Canadians Too, in which first-generation Asian Canadian youth share their experiences and perspectives. The mandate of Canadian Heritage specifically includes responsibility for the Multiculturalism Act, which is grounded in the Charter of Rights and Freedoms and is part of a broader legislative framework that includes the Canadian Human Rights Act, the Citizenship Act, and the Immigration and Refugee Protection Act. La loi sur le multiculturalisme.
The Canadian Multiculturalism Act recognizes the diversity of Canadians in regards to race, nationality or ethnic origin, color, and religion as fundamental characteristics of Canadian society, and outlines the government's multiculturalism policy. To implement Canada's multiculturalism policy, the program strives to fulfill 3 key objectives, which are: 1. Build an integrated, socially inclusive society. 2. Improve the responsiveness of institutions to the needs of a diverse population. And 3. To actively engage in discussions on multiculturalism and diversity at the international level.
Canada's Multiculturalism Grants and Contributions Program has an annual budget of $5.5 million in funding for projects that promote respect for diversity by encouraging positive interaction between cultural, religious, and ethnic communities in Canada. An additional $3 million is allocated for community-based events that foster intercultural and interfaith understanding and raise awareness of the contribution of minority groups to Canadian society. Since April 2015, Interaction has supported 26 projects that were approved for at least $9 million in total funding for initiatives that target interfaith and intercultural understanding and/or racism and discrimination. More than 200 community-led initiatives were supported in 2016-17. In February of this year, the Minister of Canadian Heritage announced a new call for applications for the Multiculturalism Interaction Program, with funding priority given to projects that work toward the elimination of discrimination, racism, and prejudice, provide opportunities for youth community engagement, and bring people together through art, culture, and sport. Les activités de diffusion et de
Public outreach and promotion activities are also a key component of the program. Key activities include the celebration of Asian Heritage Month in May and Black History Month in February. To commemorate and launch Black History Month and Asian Heritage Month, the program organizes events featuring community and political leaders which honor the legacy and significant contributions of these diverse groups to Canada.
Publishes an annual report to Parliament on the operation of the Act, which highlights activities undertaken by federal institutions to apply multiculturalism principles in the previous year. The program also supports the nationally standardized data collection strategy on hate-motivated crime. To promote a better understanding of the extent to which hate crimes are occurring in Canada, Statistics Canada produces annual analytical Jurostat reports examining the nature and extent of police-reported hate crime in Canada. Canadian Heritage also coordinates and supports the government's participation in a number of international bodies and initiatives, including the 2010 Interparliamentary Coalition for Combating Anti-Semitism, the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, and the United Nations Committee on the Elimination of Racial Discrimination. The department has also recently announced the reinstatement of the Court Challenges program in collaboration with the Department of Justice. This program will provide funding to advance test cases of national significance related to Charter rights, including language and equality rights, as well as the Charter's fundamental freedoms, democratic rights, and life, liberty, and security of the person. En outre, le gouvernement du Canada attend également.
Moreover, the Department of Canadian Heritage also looks forward to the upcoming inauguration of the National Holocaust Monument in Ottawa. Implemented through the National Holocaust Monument Act, which received royal assent in March 2011, the monument will serve as a symbol of Canadian values and diversity, and as a memorial to the innocent men, women, and children who perished during the Holocaust.
The portfolio agencies with which Canadian Heritage works. Canadian Heritage benefits from engaging with the Canadian Race Relations Foundation, an arm's-length Crown Corporation that reports to the Minister of Canadian Heritage in her role as the Minister responsible for the Canadian Multiculturalism Act. And the work of the Foundation contributes to the elimination of racism and all forms of racial discrimination. Another portfolio organization that I would mention is the Canadian Museum for Human Rights in Winnipeg.
1 minute.
Thank you. Its purpose is to explore the subject of human rights, promote respect for others, and encourage reflection and dialogue. Madame la Présidente et chers membres du comité.
Madam Chair and members of the committee, in conclusion, Canadian Heritage fully supports the government's commitment to diversity and inclusion and to countering all forms of racism and discrimination. This is a key priority for both the Multiculturalism Program and other departmental initiatives.
These findings as we continue our efforts to promote an equitable Canada with respect for diversity and inclusion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Aiken. I go to the Mr. Michaud, Commissioner Michaud, from the Royal Canadian Mounted Police.
Merci beaucoup.
10 minutes.
Good
Thank you very much.
And thank you for the opportunity to appear before this committee as part of its study of Motion 103. Je m'appelle Gilles Michaud et je suis sous-commissaire.
I am Gilles Michaud, Deputy Commissioner, Federal Policing at the RCMP.
Commitment and adherence to bias-free policing. In practice, this means that in the performance of their duties, RCMP employees treat all individuals equally, in accordance with the law, and without abusing their authority, regardless of an individual's race, nationality, ethnic origin, color, religion, gender, sexual orientation, marital status, age, mental or physical disability, citizenship, family status, socioeconomic status, or conviction for which a pardon has been granted. Creating respect and valuing diversity is essential for the RCMP, as it is for any law enforcement agency. The RCMP places a high priority on building and developing effective partnerships with communities and other law enforcement agencies to build trust. These relationships are all the more important given that there remain individuals in the country who do not share our values of inclusion and diversity and hold views that are rooted in bigotry and prejudice. Holding and or espousing these views is not of itself illegal. However, when such beliefs lead to or inspire violence, law enforcement must and does act. The process by which individuals become convinced that violence against others is a legitimate way to advance their cause is known as radicalization to violence. In Canada, this most often manifests as acts of violence against some type of identifiable group referred to as hate crimes. The Criminal Code contains specific offenses related to hate, Section 318, Section 319, and Section 430. Common offenses include, but are not limited to, intimidation, harassment, mischief, and uttering threats against persons or property. There are no Criminal Code provisions for violent hate crimes, just sentencing requirements. Section 718.2 of the Code encourages judges to treat violent offenses such as murder as hate crimes if there is evidence that the act was motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate based on race, religion, sexual orientation, or any other similar factor. Therefore, some type of primary activity must be investigated for 8 sentencing requirements to be considered. Given the nature of these offenses, the responsibility for these investigations falls to the police force of jurisdiction in communities across the country. As you know, the RCMP acts as a provincial or territorial police of jurisdiction in 8 provinces, 3 territories, and over 150 municipalities through our contract and Aboriginal policing services. Contract policing is provided through police services agreements, which are negotiated between the federal government and the provinces, territories, and municipalities. As the police of jurisdiction, the RCMP leads 8 crime investigations. The RCMP also provides training and education. For instance, the RCMP National Youth Services Program offers a variety of education and awareness resources on topics relating to ideological violence hosted on the Center for Youth Crime Prevention website. Resources are designed for police officers, parents, and persons working with youth to engage and empower them to make positive decisions. Education programs such as this are essential in combating hate crimes, as it encourages victims to report incidents so law enforcement can initiate investigations. Reporting of hate crime is essential in order for the RCMP and all law enforcement agencies to respond and disrupt acts of ideological violence, as well to understand the magnitude of the problem in our communities across the country. In areas where the RCMP is the police of jurisdiction, reported hate crimes went up from 160 in 2014 to 206 in 2015, an increase of 46 incidents. The majority of the cases reported appear to be motivated by race, ethnicity, or religion. Parmi les priorités du programme de la police fédérale,
The RCMP's federal policing program's priorities include some of the more sophisticated and complicated types of criminal activity in Canada, relating to serious and organized crime, cybercrime, national security, and protective policing. Given the role of police of jurisdiction and acting within the parameters set out in the Criminal Code, federal policing's role in investigating ideological violence is largely limited to instances where an individual or groups move towards active terrorism as defined in Section 83 of the Criminal Code. Our investigators are guided by the definition of terrorism as outlined in Section 83 of the Criminal Code. The definition is important to note. Section 8301 of the Criminal Code defines terrorism as an act committed, quote, in whole or in part for a political, religious, or ideological purpose, objective, or cause with the intention of intimidating the public or segment of the public with regard to its security, including its economic security. Therefore, for federal policing personnel to pursue a terrorism investigation, there must be an indication of an ideological basis and a motivation for the act, as well as a potential intent.
So I'm going to have to cut you off for 10 minutes. So if you need to wing it, please do so.
Certainly, ma'am.
So for charges to be laid, there must be sufficient evidence to demonstrate motivation and intent.
Committed to investigation if and when an individual moves towards acts of terrorism or other sophisticated crime. We make every effort to counter the violent ideologies that lead to violence, a process we call radicalization to violence. We use that term deliberately. It is not illegal to have radical thoughts. It is only when someone is moved to violence that law enforcement must act. Radicalization to violence is not limited to a single ethnic group, religion, socioeconomic class, or political worldview. Federal policing's counter-radicalization to violence efforts are primarily focused on preventing acts of terrorism, However, these efforts are also helpful in preventing all forms of ideological violence, as it helps us and our partners identify the people at risk of moving towards violence and helps to identify measures that can be taken to get them off that path. The RCMP continues to dedicate resources and develop training to respond to all forms of radicalization to violence. I thank you for your time and would like to reiterate our commitment to working with the committee as you proceed with your study.
Thank you very much. You did have 1 more minute left, Mr. Michel. I kind of feel like I was leaning on you there. Thank you. And the next group would be the Department of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness, Ms. Banerjee.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the invitation to appear and discuss Public Safety Canada's role in addressing systemic racism and religious discrimination, including Islamophobia. Specifically, I will be speaking about the role of the Canada Centre for Community Engagement and the Prevention of Violence, which was formally launched by the Minister of Public Safety and Emergency Preparedness this June. And I'll be talking about our role in the context of addressing radicalization to violence, issues of hate, and also some research outcomes and programming. Le Centre canadien a été...
The Canada Centre was established to coordinate a more effective approach to countering violent extremism, which can include hate crimes and hate incidents. Canada is viewed by many around the world as a model of peace, stability, and diversity. But we are not immune to racist violence and hatred. The tragic shooting at the Cultural Centre Islamique du Québec in Sainte-Foy to stop a potential bomber in Strathroy, Ontario, and those who have been motivated to travel to conflict zones to support terrorist groups show us that there is no single ideology or cause of radicalization to violence.
Process through which a person adopts a belief or ideology that justifies violence to achieve a political, religious, or ideological objective. Violent beliefs or ideologies can be premised on intolerance or hatred towards an ethnic, religious, or cultural group. In this context, radicalization to violence may not only lead to terrorist activity, but may also lead to hate crimes against certain groups. The Canada Centre provides national leadership and coordination on efforts to prevent radicalization to violence in 3 areas. First, we try and advance key policy priorities, such as the development of a national strategy to counter radicalization to violence. Second, we support action-oriented research. And finally, we are looking to invest in local-level programming through the recently launched Community Resilience Fund. To support its mandate, the Canada Centre has commenced engaging broadly with different levels of government, civil society, academia, private sector, and most importantly, Canadians, to discuss its work and help shape the development of this national strategy to counter radicalization to violence. Deep and meaningful engagement will help inform programming, research, and policy priorities. Coordinating efforts across all levels to ensure that Canadians have the full range of tools and mechanisms to address the array of threats facing our communities, including hate crimes and violent extremism, is our key priority. Over the past few years, the Department has funded research initiatives to improve our knowledge and evidence base on a range of issues related to extremist violence, including both terrorist activity and far-right violence. Several studies have examined best practices in developing alternative narratives aimed at diminishing expressions of hatred and violent extremism online. Examples of best practices are the use of humor and building empathy between speakers and recipients of hate speech to shift the conversation away from expressions of hate and de-escalate the risk of violence. Other best practices highlight the need for alternative narrative campaigns to be sustainable, to use appropriate platforms to reach the targeted audience, and to better understand the needs of a particular audience. Public Safety Canada has also funded and supported a number of studies pertaining to right-wing extremism in Canada. In 2016, academics Barbara Perry and Ryan Scrivens published an in-depth portrait of the right-wing extremism movement in Canada. One of the findings of the report recommends using a multi-agency effort by partnering law enforcement with anti-hate community organizations to better address the threat. A second study on the future of right-wing terrorism in Canada was authored by Richard Parent and James Ellis as part of a working paper series by the Canadian Network for Research on Terrorism, Security and Society, also known as TSAS. The study points to Canada's democratic institutions and its support for diversity and its policies of multiculturalism as resources against extreme right-wing ideas and movements. These studies provide critical information to inform on how best to design our approaches to counter violent extremism, including violence motivated by hatred. Le budget de 2016.
Budget 2016 provided ongoing funding to create the Community Resilience Fund, which provides financial assistance to organizations undertaking programming and research to address radicalization to violence in Canada. The fund will be a key element of the Canada Centre's efforts to build domestic capacity at the local level and develop research. 4 key priority areas for the fund have been identified. First, intervention programming. Second, performance measurement and evaluation tools. Third, action-oriented research. And fourth, youth engagement and the development of alternative narratives. The fund's current call for proposals is open until October 1st, 2017, and we hope to receive many proposals.
And we are optimistic we'll receive many ideas and proposals. The Canada Centre is currently supporting a number of programming initiatives to help build local resources and services. So one example is Project Someone, and that actually means social media education every day, which is based out of Montreal and provides tools and training for educators who want to promote discussions and awareness on hate speech through art and multimedia platforms. Other examples of programming include support to multi-agency hubs to conduct interventions with at-risk individuals and developing needs assessments on capabilities, vulnerabilities, and skills gaps in communities in the online space. We are funding the development of the Canada Evidence-Based Practitioners Network, which aims to support the growing community of professional practitioners and civil society actors in Canada who are involved in assessment, prevention, and intervention with individuals at risk of violent radicalization. Our approach is to support local solutions to local problems using local actors, as we feel this is a more effective way to support communities. We are working with partners across Canada and internationally to share best practices, increase understanding of violent extremism, funding innovative projects and initiatives, and improve our ability to measure and evaluate results to demonstrate accountability to Canadians. In addition to the Community Resilience Fund, Public Safety Canada also has the Communities at Risk Security Infrastructure Program, which is commonly referred to as CIP. CIP will invest $10 million over the next 5 years with $2 million annually to help support not-for-profit organizations with their security infrastructure improvement needs. This can help communities who feel that they are at risk of hate crimes improve the security of their places of worship, community centers, and educational institutions. So in conclusion, I'd just like to reiterate that hatred and radicalization to violence are interconnected issues that require many perspectives, a strong evidence base, and firm commitment on the part of all levels of government and Canadians to address them. Ongoing engagement with Canadians will help us better understand how we can best support and improve capacity at the local level to overcome the influence of violent ideologies and hateful beliefs. We are committed to working extensively with Canadians and with colleagues at every level of government to address this issue, and I look forward to discussing this issue with you today and reading the outcomes of your study.
Thank you very much. And now I'm going to go to Mr. Trottier. Yes, please, from the Canadian Heritage Committee?
From the Treasury Board Secretariat.
Ah, because I have here, you're from the Canadian Heritage Committee, Treasury Board Secretariat. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting us today to speak to you about recruitment, retention programs, and all the best practices the Government of Canada has to promote and support a diverse workforce and inclusive workplace. The Office of the Chief Human Resource Officer, where I work, supports the Treasury Board Secretariat as the employer. It is responsible for workplace and workforce policies, terms and conditions of employment, and provides institutions with data, information, and advice on a range of HR-related issues. The work we do assists federal organizations to fulfill their responsibility for HR management, including recruitment and retention. La Commission de la fonction publique joue deux grands rôles.
The PSC plays two major roles, one of oversight to ensure the integrity of the hiring process, and the other in providing a range of recruitment and assessment services to organizations. Finally, the Canada School of Public Service has a full suite of learning and development programs, including orientation training for new recruits and other courses that incorporate information on employment equity. A number of policy instruments also help reduce barriers and support the full participation of all groups in the workplace. These include the employment equity policy, the policy on duty to accommodate, and the policy on harassment prevention and resolution. As part of our accommodation strategy, we also offer employees quiet rooms, which may be used for prayer. All 4 employment equity designated groups, namely women, Aboriginal peoples, persons with disabilities, and members of visible minorities, continue to exceed their workforce availability for the public service as a whole for the 4th year in a row. However, more remains to be done to reflect the people we serve and strengthen a culture of diversity and inclusion. To that end, we have a number of initiatives underway.
Including 19 from outside of the National Capital Region, from 20 departments and agencies participated in the Indigenous Youth Summer Employment Opportunities. Developed through a partnership established last year with the Assembly of First Nations, the program places Indigenous post-secondary students from across the country in meaningful summer jobs in a variety of departments and agencies. Through the Youth with Disability Summer Employment Opportunities, 18 students who self-identified as having a disability were hired by 7 departments. In April 2017, OCHRO, the Office of the Chief Human Resource Officer, released tools that highlight best practices and guidance related to the onboarding experience. These tools, developed with the Canada School of Public Service and 12 departments and agencies, aim to help make the Deputy Minister's Student Pledge a reality and reflect the government's commitment to improve how we recruit, onboard, and develop our student workforce. More than 13,000 students were hired this summer across Canada by the Public Service. All of these students were invited to complete a new student exit survey. The analysis survey will be used to improve the experience for students in the future. We are also partnering with Live, Work, Play, a Canadian charitable organization that, amongst other things, connect people with intellectual disabilities to work. Live, Work, Play has 18 successful pilots within 8 public service organizations. Le secrétariat du Conseil du Trésor appuie également les administrateurs généraux.
TBS also supports deputy head champions who help advance specific priorities for the employment equity groups.
Mental champions and chairs. Their work range from identifying barriers and priorities for action to education and awareness to sharing their best practices. They are at the various stages of developing recommendations and action plans to support employment equity objectives. When we looked at the challenges faced by each of the designated groups, there are some clear overarching themes, such as inclusiveness, engagement, respect, and particular opportunity for the development and advancement.
We acknowledge that we have low representation in the executive category among 3 of the designated groups: women, Aboriginal peoples, and the members of visible minorities. Our Executive Leadership Development Program optimizes diversity and accelerates the development of high potential leaders within the executive ranks. Diversity is leveraged to every extent possible when selecting cohort participants.
The creation of a joint task force, bringing together both government and union representatives to explore new ways to strengthen diversity and inclusion in the public service. The task force mandate goes beyond employment equity to focus on how we can build a more diverse workforce and an inclusive workplace. The task force has consulted with employees and stakeholders across the public service. A progress update was issued in June 2017. The final report with specific recommendations in diversity and inclusion is expected to be released this fall. Une approche que nous prenons pour réduire les obstacles.
One approach we are taking to reduce barriers to hiring minority and economically disadvantaged group is to implement a new name-blind recruitment strategy. We've been working with the Public Service Commission on this pilot, which will provide insight on the effect of name-blind recruitment in the Canadian federal public service context. The pilot will compare outcomes associated with traditional screening of job applicants versus screening in which managers are blinded to the applicant's name. The pilot will involve external selection processes from 16 participating departments. The final report will be released by the Public Service Commission for the end of 2017.
Allow for questions.
You actually had about 3 more minutes, but thank you anyway, Mr. Trottier. We will begin the question, and this is a 7-minute round, which means that the questions and the answers must fit into the 7-minute time space. So Ms. de Brussen begins for the Liberals for 7 minutes.
First of all, I'd like to thank all of you for your presentations. That was really wonderful global start and a lot of information for us to pull from. My first question is actually just directed to Ms. Aiken, and it's a request for you to actually provide us in writing. I don't need the answer verbally right now, but if you would be able to provide to us, to the committee, a breakdown over the past 15 years. Why don't we bring it back to 2000, just that way we start from 2000, of the funding that has been provided to multiculturalism in the Heritage Department for 2000 to present, and if that could provide a breakdown of the programs for which the funding was provided.
Okay. As I'm sure you know, the program was recently welcomed back into Canadian Heritage after having been at Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship Canada since 2009-10, I believe. So that will require some coordination between the two departments. So I appreciate your request being in writing. Also, I think it could be quite an extensive response. So
no, I appreciate that. Thank you very much. And actually, I will stay with you. Most of my questions right now are going to be about hate crimes data, because that forms part of this study. And in some earlier questions, we had talked about unified standards or the unified definition for hate crimes. And I believe in your opening comments, you talked about the multiculturalism program supporting a nationally standardized data collection strategy on hate-motivated crime. I wanted to ask you a little bit about that. Firstly, who collects, who is the person or the department that runs that strategy?
So it's really run by Statistics Canada. Although Canadian Heritage supports the initiative, it's really Statistics Canada. And what they collect are police-reported hate crimes. So they collect information from municipal, provincial police forces as well as from the RCMP.
And when was the last report that was generated through this?
So the last report that was published applies to the year 2015, but it was published earlier this year.
Okay. And for this strategy, is there a unified definition that is now being used for hate-motivated crimes?
Well, if you look at the publications from Statistics Canada, they describe what they mean by hate crimes in terms of the statistics that they collect. Hate crimes refer to criminal offenses motivated by bias, prejudice, or hate based on race, national or ethnic origin, language, color, religion, sex, age, mental or physical disability, sexual orientation, or any other similar factors such as profession or political beliefs.
And I did look at the StatsCan surveys, but I wasn't sure that the police that were reporting up to StatsCan were all using the same definition. That was a part that I didn't have an answer to.
And I, other than that, the StatsCan definition, possibly my colleague from the RCMP could provide you some further information about what the police do.
I was going to ask him about the RCMP side in 1 second, but if actually, why don't I go straight to you, if I may, and just ask you. I'm sorry, going through all these. How does the RCMP define hate crimes when you're collecting data?
So basically the way it works is that you've got these, what we call these UCR codes that are utilized, that are based on StatsCan, and they provide us with the definitions by which that we report on those statistics.
Okay, and so when you collect the data internally, you collect it using that definition?
Yes, we do.
All right. And in your statement, you referred to an increase in reported hate crimes. And I can't see the years right now. From 2014 to 2015, there was an increase. And I guess my question is, has there been any study to determine, is that because more hate crimes were reported, or if that reflected a greater incidence of hate crimes?
No, I'm not aware of any studies that were conducted to analyze that trend at all.
So it's not clear whether it might be one or the other?
No, exactly.
The other question I had, and you might be able to tell me from the RCMP side, I had a question as well for Ms. Aiken, but it's about intersectionality, which is that if there's a hate-motivated crime against a person who may have two different minority situations. So if I was going to just take an example, somebody who's part of the LGBTQ2 community, but who is also a person of color, how is it tracked? Is it tracked collecting both possible basis for the hate crime?
That's a very good question. I couldn't answer as to how that would be reported, because it would be left up to the police officer that is responding to the event, and depending on what he would score on his report. So it could be either way, but I would be adventuring in unknown territory to say that it's either or both.
So would you be able to perhaps provide me with any policies that you have that direct officers as to how to record that?
Yes, I could look into that.
Monsieur Moisin, est-ce que vous avez quelque chose aussi?
Mr. Moisin, do you have anything to say about this topic? Microphone, please. StatsCan works also directly with police forces to provide training so they're aware of the various distinctions, and we give them tools. I only have 30 seconds, so...
Because you refer to work, there was a future of right-wing terrorism in Canada was one of the studies you referred to. Do you think that it would be helpful when collecting hate crime data to also be collecting data as to who are the suspects or the people who are found to be committing these crimes?
To be honest, I think, again, this is probably something where StatsCan can provide further guidance in terms of what information police are reporting out, because they do provide some information on the context of each particular case. So I'm not sure, from our perspective, when we're assessing threats, or when the security intelligence community are assessing threats, I'm not sure how necessarily that links back to it. We're looking at global threats in particular, and from our perspective, we take the advice from the security intelligence community in terms of what's a priority, and we'll respond from a global policy perspective to make sure that programs and research are looking at all types of threats.
Thank you, Ms. Banerjee. I will now go to David Anderson for the Conservatives. 7 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I want to thank our guests for being here with us today. Deputy Commissioner, I'd just like to talk to you a little bit about, follow up on Ms. DeBruzen's questions, but do you think that there's any need for us to, or any desire or interest in us reducing the protection for faith communities across Canada right now. I read that 1/3 of the reported hate crimes in Canada are motivated by hatred of a religion. Would you suggest this would be a good time to reduce the protections that faith communities have?
So again, so that's for us, what we look at criminal activities in and around those religious sites or communities. And we will work with whatever law that exists in order to make sure that they're safe. We do work with them on a regular basis around threat assessments. So it's not necessarily just enshrined in law, it's enshrined in the work and the relationship that we have with these communities and trying to enable them to raise their awareness around security threats that may exist. And some of the police force of jurisdiction will even provide some guidance around how to better protect themselves.
Okay, so we have criminal code right now provisions that prohibit interference with clergy when they're performing their functions as clergy, prohibits assault or interference with clergymen who are going to or performing religious ceremony, prohibits disrupting religious gatherings or worship, and prohibits disturbing or disrupting worship services. Do you think those are good provisions to have in place to protect faith communities in Canada?
So again, so that's not for me to decide. That would be for government to decide what type of laws they want us to uphold.
Okay, well, I can see what you're doing here, because this is actually something the government has said that they're going to be removing from the criminal code. C-51 takes those 4 provisions, takes them out, and I guess, do you see any reason at this time why we would be removing those protections from faith communities?
Not that I see, not that I'm aware of.
I'm not going to comment on that. Can you take us through your response to an incident? Something happens at a synagogue or a mosque. Can you just run through how do you deal with that? What's the procedure, the protocol, the RCMP in dealing with that? And then again, at what point, following up on Ms. DeBruce, at what point does that then be declared a hate crime?
So so from our perspective, so when a call comes in, police officers will be dispatched to the site. We'll conduct interviews of individuals, the victims, people that might be have noticed or can provide us with information around the related crime. If there's a suspect that is identified, then we'll follow where the evidence leads us. Then when we're looking at the hate crimes, so again, based on the definition by Stats Canada, that will be the triggers for us to then report if it's hate crime or not, or the basis for which, based on the information that we've collected from the witnesses, from the victims, and even from the suspect, because suspects, because when it comes to ideology and understanding as to why a crime was committed, sometimes it's information that's collected from the suspect.
Does that typically appear then when you charge, or is it when you make comment ahead of time? I'm just wondering, at what point do you declare this to be a hate crime? Is it when the charges are laid?
Not necessarily. It can be, from our perspective, because it can lead, some investigations may lead to no charges, yet it can still be an hate crime, because we didn't meet, I would say not an hate crime, but hatred in nature, because if we're unable to prove all the elements of the offense, we won't be able to lay charges. Doesn't prevent us, though, to indicate that the incident was based on hatred.
Okay, and so you mentioned terrorism as well in your report. At what point then would you say, well, this is maybe a hate crime, but it's also terrorist? It's a terrorism incident?
Yeah, that's a very good question. For us, it's really the intent behind the actions, and when the intent are, well, first of all, it's got to be driven by ideology, and then when the intent is really to try to, I guess the best way I can describe it is instill fear, instill in the broader community. So it's not necessarily on one specific individual, but when they're trying to pass either a political, a religious, or ideological message to a broader community, that's where we're starting to look at that Section 83 part of the criminal code.
Okay. We heard a little bit about the SIP program, which we put in place, but I'm just wondering, do you have any other extra support that you give to religious communities or to religious institutions from the RCMP?
So not necessarily to religious communities per se, but all communities where we've got community engagement to basically raise awareness, help them, I guess, identify pathways or other services that may exist that could help them. So from a frontline policing perspective, we do community engagement on a regular basis. So from our overall operational policing activities, we've got that community engagement. So it's not specifically just for religious communities.
Okay, I think I've got about a minute left. Ms. Aitken.
I have 2 minutes left.
2 minutes left?
Well,
okay,
a minute
good.
and a half.
Then we can have an even better discussion here. But I want to come back to Ms. Aitken's statement here, where you talk about Canada being in the top-ranking OECD country on a measure of tolerance with respect to community acceptance of minority groups and migrants, at a score of 84 compared to an OECD average of 61. So considerably higher or whatever. And I'm just wondering if you can square the circle, because we're talking today about systemic racial discrimination, systemic religious discrimination across Canada. How do we square that circle when we hear that, and that's the whole motion is about studying these systemic issues that we have, and yet your information seems to say that Canada is doing pretty well, if depending on what I don't know what the marking system is, but can you just talk a little bit about that?
I'm not sure how much I can help you with that. As I said in my remarks, there are areas for concern, such as increased statistics that show an increase in hate crimes, for instance, and there are positive things, and there are many indications of positive things about diversity and inclusion and the inclusiveness of Canadian society, and the Canadian Heritage programs that contribute to that sense of belonging and pride in Canada is something that is very important from our department's point of view, and it is a true, those facts are true as well.
So we should go
it's
with
not one or the other, I guess.
Okay. Right. I think my time's up, but I can keep going.
No, you finished. You're good. Thank you very much. Ms. Kwan.
Thanks very much, Madam Chair, and I want to thank all the officials as well for appearing before our committee. I have many questions, so I'm going to start first, I guess, on the statistics, because I think it is important. And so my first question then is to the Deputy Commissioner. Based on the data to which you shared with us at the committee, I'm wondering how many of those, or do you have this information, how many of those incidents are prosecuted, and if they are in fact prosecuted, how many of them are successful in terms of outcome, and if they are successful, what is the sentencing?
So unfortunately, I don't have that information at hand, but I could come back with a written response to that question if you don't.
I would love to have that information, because I think that would be very useful, and it'd be good to get that information on a year-to-year comparison so that we can see how things have evolved, right? And I understand the data that you have, is it the case that the data is only available up until 2 years ago? So there's no more current data than that?
Yeah.
Okay, and if we can get that data as you collect it, to also break it down on what kinds of hate crime are we talking about, right? So then we have a sense of it, so it's not a general sense of hate crime altogether. Is it on the basis of religious discrimination and hate? And if so, which faith, for example? That kind of information would be very useful and helpful. I guess then the other question that I have, then I would go to Ms. Atkin, if I may. On the government action, so you listed a whole host of different programming and different things like that, and I think actually Ms. Banerjee also offers some information around that as well. But I'm wondering, is there a comprehensive approach, a government action plan, if you will, that targets systemic discrimination and religious discrimination? Is there any such plan? For example, 5 years ago, there was a 5-year plan that Canada had, and that was to deal with is the Canada Action Plan on Racism, and there was a 5-year plan. There was an evaluation on it, and then there was some promise about renewing it, and of course, nothing happened. So I'm wondering what's happened to that plan, and is there any work being done with respect to that, or is there any government action on a government plan on the whole to address this rising issue that we now face in Canadian lives?
So the action plan that you're referring to was a 5-year plan, and it did sunset. There were several initiatives. It was an umbrella for a number of initiatives. There were several initiatives that were part of that plan that continue today, such as the statistics collection that we've been talking about, and several others. Diversity and inclusion is a priority of the government, and there are many initiatives. There isn't anything at the moment that's called the action plan of the Government of Canada.
Maybe I can just add that we are committed to developing a national strategy to counter radicalization to violence. We're hopeful that the strategy will be developed by next year, and part of us getting to the development of the strategy is an engagement process over the next few months.
Well, thank you for that. I think that there are two aspects to which we're talking about. Radicalization is really important work, no question about that, but also talking about the day-to-day experience and the lived experience of systemic discrimination and religious discrimination is very real, and is maybe a different realm of the radicalization that the work that you're doing on. And I think that we need both, frankly. I do. I think we need both, and I hope that the government will take a look at that with respect to that. It will be great for us, for this committee, to get the information on the basis of that action plan, the Canada Action Plan on racism, to sort of find out within that plan what aspect is continuing in terms of programming, how much is being put towards it, and where that is at, to get sort of that information before the committee, and which parts is not, right? Because there was an evaluation done, and there is important information, and maybe we can build on that work in going forward, coming out of this committee, and maybe in other realms. So I wonder whether or not that's information that could be shared for this committee.
Thing that we could provide.
Fabulous. I just want to build on this, because the other thing is on collecting data. I appreciate the work that's being done. StatsCan is providing some information, but we also know that there's a lot of data that is not being collected. I come across constituents all the time who share their stories with me around their lived experience of what's gone on in terms of discrimination, and sometimes systemic discrimination and discrimination on the basis of religious beliefs. In fact, most recently, I just came across a young woman who told me that her employer told her that because she wears a niqab and she wanted to get more hours of work, she had to not wear it. I mean, that's a lived experience. She hasn't reported it to the police or anything like that, but that's real. So it has great implications in terms of economic impact, financial impact for people as well. So I wonder if anybody can share for the committee, or maybe not at this moment because I have less than 2 minutes now, if we can get your ideas and suggestions on how to collect that data, and including data that's online as well. There's a lot of hate going on, I'm sad to say, including the stuff that goes online. How do we track that, and how do we deal with that in an effective way, and that brings in accountability for people who seem to think that they can just hide behind a faceless and fake name? So I offer that question. Maybe I'll lead with Ms. Atkin to see whether or not there are some ways to which the government can offer, or suggestions at a later time, to provide us with ways of collecting data beyond what is being reported to StatsCan.
So one point that I might make there is, when you talk about discrimination, all of the provinces have human rights codes, and there's a Canadian Human Rights Code as well. So that's one place where information about discrimination is collected. From a Canadian heritage point of view, a lot of the information we try to collect is about sense of belonging and inclusion. So I'm not sure whether we would be the right place for more data on discrimination, but I'm happy to consider it.
Can I, if you can consider it, that would be very helpful.
I'm sorry, we've gone over time now. Thank you. Perhaps another round, Ms. Kwan. Now I go to Mr. Breton and Vandal. You're splitting your time, I understand.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Are you going first here?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I will be sharing my time with my colleague. Thank you all for being with us here today to enlighten us on this very important study. The multicultural policy really interests me, Ms. Aiken. I live in a region, a rural region, and my riding There are 119 different nationalities there, 40 different languages that are spoken. And this is a wealth that we have. It's extraordinary to have all these nationalities present in my region. But I would like to know, I'm concerned about the multicultural policy. How is it adapted to rural regions? Or is there an adaptation to regions versus urban centers? This is relatively new, maybe only 10 or 12 years old. Well, there was a lot of migration, and this happens relatively well. But I would like to know, how can we make people aware outside of large centers? Often we do this in urban centers, but we don't talk about it as much in rural regions. So I'd like to hear from you how this can be adapted and to make the population aware regarding the multicultural policy.
Policy for Canada. The programs that operate under the policy provide funding for projects and for events, and quite a number of those things that are funded are in the regions. I couldn't give you an exact breakdown right now, but they're spread out across Canada. So certainly the program supports events and projects that would be specific to regions as well as and to different parts of the country, different locations and so on.
Donc, on parle plus précisément.
So specifically here, the program, I've forgotten the name, you mentioned it earlier. It was the Interaction program, yes? Can we have the breakdown? I think this is public. So a breakdown of all the locations where these events were held and where the money was attributed. That would be interesting for the members of the committee to see this, to see a breakdown and to see what it gives in terms of urban centers and rural regions. So if you could send the committee this, that would be highly appreciated. Perhaps I have a couple seconds left before I give the rest of my friend the rest of my time. Mr. Trottier? No, sorry, I'll give my time to my colleague.
Community Resilience Fund, how long has it been around?
So the budget 2016 announced the funding, so of 35 million over 5 years with 10 million ongoing. So it started in 2016. The money came in at the end of 2016. Each year, it's for the next 5 years, it's a gradual increment for the Community Resilience Fund.
So it's a brand new program that
yes,
was brought in 16.
Yes. Yeah.
Okay, I was not aware of that. That's excellent news. As well, the Community Resilience Fund, Communities at Risk Security Infrastructure Fund. Could you tell me a bit more about that?
So the Security Infrastructure Fund, or SIP, is a separate program that has been around for many years, I think 4 or 5 years, and got renewed in the last budget. So that's $2 million a year for the next 5 years, and that's more specific to institutions, primarily religious or educational institutions, who want mechanisms to beef up their security. So surveillance, fences, perimeters. So it's physical security to protect specific establishments. The Community Resilience Fund is different. It's really there to talk about, to address issues related to radicalization, violence more broadly.
Could we get a breakdown in writing about the funding over the last 4 years for the Communities at Risk Fund?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. Last question to Monsieur Trottier, I believe. No, I'm sorry, Mr. Michaud. Mr. Michaud, what does the RCMP do to build relationships with Indigenous communities across Canada?
So we've got different programs that exist with the Indigenous communities that we serve across the country. Some of it is on, like I said earlier, on our day-to-day operations and engagement with the communities. We've got mentoring projects with some of the communities for the youths that might be at risk. All of our members that work in those communities are usually involved in communities themselves through work outside of their work. So they will be involved as coaches, be involved in different community events. So those are the ways that we try to build a relationship with those communities. So speaking specifically on a program that may exist nationally, like I'm not in charge of the Aboriginal policing program, I could come back with, I could ask that program to say, is there anything else that we're doing if you're interested?
Okay, and how long have those initiatives been ongoing?
So again, so the ones that I'm referring to, that's been since we've been policing basically in those communities. But if we've got a national program, I'd have to go back and check and come back to you.
Would you be able to present that to us or send that to us in writing?
Yep. Yep.
Okay, sure. That would be good. Merci. Merci beaucoup.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take the opportunity to just ask a couple of questions since I have you captive right there in front of me. I wanted to ask a question about intersectionality. Canada took intersectionality in the 1990s to the world stage, where we talked about the various discrimination that is because of the various components that make you a minority, So I am surprised that there is no study working with the RCMP, et cetera, to talk about when you have a case to look at whether intersectionality is a big part of that, because that would give us a lot of data. And so I'm hoping that this is something that you would start working on, because we are now using the term intersectionality in the last 2 years, but we need to put some teeth into it and get some data. So I just wanted to suggest that maybe that is something that that maybe Ms. Banerjee and Statistics Canada and even Treasury Board can start looking at, because it would give us, it'll be able to tunnel down into the nature of systemic discrimination. I also I heard that you, Ms. Aiken, you said that you didn't have an action plan. Ms. Kwan asked you that, and I know that when I was Minister for Multiculturalism, we had a very active action plan. And you are governed by the Multiculturalism Act per se. You're supposed to make sure that the Multiculturalism Act is carried out. My question is, programs and projects are fine, but what are you doing in your group, in your department, or your section within the Heritage Canada to look at the issue of ensuring under the Act that minorities, regardless of their ethnicity, race, religion, et cetera, are able to participate fully, because that's a mandate of the Act, to participate fully in the economic, social, political, and cultural life of the country. Is anything proactively being done to ensure that that happens? So that's a question, and before you answer it, I just want to add one more piece to it, because I don't want to take too much time. And that other piece is that it used to be, when I was a Minister for Multiculturalism, that we worked very closely with Statistics Canada, not just to find out what they are finding out, but to actually put questions to Statistics Canada so they could, again, tunnel down to intersectionality, tunnel down into getting at the root of it, because systemic institutionalized racism and religious discrimination actually is propagated quite often by institutions, unwittingly or otherwise. And so when we hear that the RCMP is very, people say the RCMP, especially in certain parts of this country, pick a fight with Aboriginal people, racialize them as they do with certain black communities. We need to be able to find out if that is actually true, and if so, how are we getting information on that? So I wonder if multiculturalism programs should be more proactive and in terms of getting information, working closely with others. By the way, I want to say you guys have, Ms. Banerjee, I love what you're doing in your sector. I think it's important.
So just to go back and just to make sure that I wasn't unclear, with respect to the Multiculturalism Act and the program under the Act, that certainly is active, and in May of this year, the Minister announced a call for proposals with a specific focus on projects that work toward eliminating racial discrimination as well as projects for youth, for community engagement, and bringing people together through art, culture, or sport. So that is the most recent call for proposals under the program. So I didn't mean to suggest that we weren't doing that. I might ask my colleague to respond on your question about working together with Statistics Canada.
No, I meant, I didn't just mean projects. I think projects are great, programs are great, but I really wanted to talk about proactively ensuring that we foster and we give communities that are marginalized the ability to be able to participate fully. What are the barriers they face? How can you help them with the skills and tools? That's what I'm asking about, because that was a big part of multiculturalism at one time.
We're doing work with a lot of the departments to, raise awareness. We have champions in every department. We give them tools. What are the questions you need to ask yourself when you develop policies and programs, so that you actually think in terms of, well, what if you're in the minority group where issues of intersectionality matter? How should you go about your policies and programs? The other thing we're doing is, even within Canadian Heritage, dealing with diversity is not about only the multiculturalism program. We've got a range of arts and culture programs that are actually supporting a lot of festivals, a lot of museum exhibits, and so on and so forth, that actually speak and talk about full participation, and the fact that actually we're seeing people from a range of communities on your TV screen or on stages in theaters is about also full participation. So I would say that within the department, we're not limiting ourselves when we talk about full participation to the multiculturalism program. As to working with Statistics Canada, we're engaging constantly with them about new tools, new ideas, things they could study. I think they have their own challenges in what we can find through a statistical study, as opposed to another type of research to say, where is it that the real discrimination happens, and there are limits to the statistical versus other types of research. So that's why we work also with other academics who are looking into these issues, so we get at other perspectives on issues of discrimination, and we're very active in monitoring and working with academics so that we actually understand better what the situation is now on the ground in terms of discrimination.
Thank you. Ms. Banerjee?
Sorry. I don't have anything specific more to add, other than in our context, we are supporting a range of research that's looking at how it's more focused on the effectiveness of specific programming dealing with countering radicalization to violence. For example, we're supporting programming that's led by local law enforcement to look at-risk youth and find different social service providers who are better placed to address the issues of that radicalized youth, rather than have them go further into the criminal justice system. So these are hub models, but we are also supporting researchers at Ryerson, for example, and University of Alberta, to study and assess and evaluate those models. There are three actually models in particular, to see if they're effective and they're actually working. So that's our approach in terms of the data aspect of data, is really looking at metrics to see what programming is effective in Canada. And again, our context is a little bit narrower than what multiculturalism and Canadian heritage is looking at. What's actually working.
Thanks. Thank you very much. I want to thank everyone for coming and presenting and being engaged.
One more invitation for us.
It is now 6:30. Mr. Anderson does not wish to see us lengthen this.
I would say that in the future, if the chair is going to ask questions, she should take it out of the Liberals' time, because Mr. Sweet just lost his opportunity to ask questions today, and we're very happy to have you ask questions. It should come out of the time of the Liberal Party. They had the last 12 minutes here. Mr. Sweet missed his opportunity to ask questions.
The chair makes a decision on whether we think we could give everybody in a second round a chance. And in this instance, only Mr. Sweet would have had a chance. Nobody else would have on a second round because of the time. We spent extra 15 minutes on the first round with Ms. Khalid, and that took out of this.
That's all fine, but the point is that the Liberal Party got the extra 5 minutes. Mr. Sweet did not. It wasn't as if we didn't have the 5 minutes. So we do not actually want to see this happen again.
I have never had the chair be seen as a member of the committee in terms of questions. And I don't usually ask questions, but I did really want to get some information. So anyway, we can discuss that at another time, but I wanted to make sure that everyone who is going to send written responses, that you please send them to the clerk so that every member of the committee can get a copy of those written responses. Thank you so very much for coming. Meeting adjourned.